everyone, and welcome. My name is Stephen Goldberg of Optimus Performance, bringing you practical tips on leadership, team development, and employee performance in the workplace. And I'm very pleased and happy to have with me Carlee Myers, who's an expert on handling stress due to complicated situations. I'll just read your bio, Carlee, and welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So Carlee Myers is an expert at helping leaders who have experienced devastating loss deal with day-to-day stress in a way that creates more satisfying results, such as improved sleep, easeful ability to set boundaries, increased income, fulfilling personal relationships, and more. Carlee Myers is a diplomat of the American Institute of Stress, has had her work most recently featured in media outlets such as Parade, Fox 29, Good Day Philadelphia, the Maui News, and Holy Magazine. Carlee is also the creator of the Stress Less method, a signature 5-step process that walks women through the steps they need to take to experience true emotional freedom. Thank you again for joining me, Carlee. I'm excited to hear about your 5-step process. Now, in your bio, it says women. Does this work for men too? Or
no.
It
I work for everyone. I think that was just a typo.
I see. Everyone. Okay. So you work mostly with leaders. And so tell me about this problem of stress due to, stressful or traumatic event, I guess is what you're saying. What type of events occur that cause people to go through these high levels of stress?
Yeah. So when I say that I help people who've experienced devastating loss, I'm talking about loss ranging from the obvious, right? Death, but also things like divorce, things like injury, things like unwanted career changes, and really just the shift of life as we knew it, as we wanted it to be, as we thought it was going to be. And so I really support leaders who've experienced a crazy event like that, to navigate day-to-day stress. And the reason that I have this very specific niche, the intersection of loss and stress, is that once we've experienced a devastating loss, what happens is our nervous system actually becomes more sensitive, which means those day-to-day stressors, let's say the 100 emails that you get a day, before you experience that loss, they're stressful, sure. But after your nervous system becomes more sensitive, it can almost feel unbearable. And so that is the reason that I've kind of landed at that intersection, is because so many of us have experienced loss and we haven't been taught how to navigate stress after loss.
Yeah, I'm actually, somebody close to me just went through a divorce very recently, and I saw what a toll it took on them. And so I could appreciate what you're saying. How did you decide to get into this and choose this niche? What led you or motivated you to do this?
Yeah, so that's a bag of worms, or a can of worms, I should say. But the Cliff Notes version, and I guess I should give just a bit of a trigger warning before I share, but the Cliff Notes version is that, it all boils down to back when I was about 12 years old, believe it or not. When I was about 12, my mom ended up dating a bad apple. She realized it pretty quickly and broke it off. And she moved on. And unfortunately, that ex-boyfriend didn't move on. And a few weeks later, ended up breaking into my childhood home, killing my mom's new boyfriend and trying to kill my mom. And so while my mom basically made a full recovery, which was an absolute miracle, I really struggled for a long time. I struggled with the symptoms of PTSD, with stress, with overwhelm, the whole gamut. And when I finally opened up for support, which took a while, but when I finally did, I would ask for advice, and it was like clockwork. I got the same 5 or so responses every time. Hey, Carlee, have you tried therapy? Have you tried yoga, meditation, changing your diet, hitting the gym? And when I received that advice, I felt so defeated because, right, there's a reason that these 5 or so things are so mainstream. They help so many people. But for me, I was like, oh, I've already tried these things. And while they helped, they definitely helped. None of them got me over that hump where I was experiencing that beautiful state of mind that I knew was absolutely possible. And so luckily I'm a pretty resilient person, and I was not willing to accept low grade misery as my new normal. And so I kept exploring, which led me to, all the solutions that are encompassed in the stress less method and the method and the steps that I teach. But yeah, I got into this line of work because I saw that there was nothing out here, nothing in the world like this. No one was talking about the fact that there was no one size fits all when it comes to stress management, when it comes to mental health. And somebody needed to have the conversation. And of course, I was passionate enough to start the Stress Less company and get the ball rolling.
Well, yes, firsthand what that experience is like. And so let's walk through, the steps so people can get an understanding of what those are. And I imagine it's not just the steps, but it's the intervention you bring to the interaction, to the relationship, which makes it work. So, but let's hear about what those steps are.
Yeah, sure. So the stress less method includes 5 steps. The first step is to manage your energy. In other words, manage your nervous system. Each and every one of us has a uniquely wired nervous system, especially if we've experienced loss. And so the first step is about getting to know your nervous system and getting to know what's going to get you out of that fight, flight, freeze, or faint and into the rest and digest mode, right? So that you can regain access to critical thinking. You can think clearly and you have a solid foundation to move forward on. The second step is to identify your blocks. So when I say the second step, most people are like, oh, I know my blocks. Like, all right, we're done with step 2. But that's actually not the case. Most of us are, when we think about our blocks, we're thinking about the symptoms of our blocks. So for instance, okay, I know that it drives me nuts when my coworker doesn't submit their work on time, whatever the example is, right? That's actually a symptom of the block, right? And so step 2 is about looking at all the symptoms and seeing what's underneath the surface. What ways in which have we created more suffering for ourselves?
So could you give an example of a block though, like so people get a better picture of what what a block is?
Yeah. So a great example of a block, which we hear about all the time, so I think most people will be able to grasp this pretty quickly. Let's say the symptom is, it makes me so angry when this client doesn't pay me on time, right? That makes me absolutely so angry. The underneath piece of that, as we start to dig deeper and look underneath, we might start to realize, hey, wait a second. We don't have good contracts in place. We don't have good payment systems in place. We don't have all this. But then underneath of that, we find that there's a limiting belief. We find that there's something that is perpetuating the suffering, something that's preventing us from seeing, wait, I need to put a contract in place. Wait, it would be great if I put payments on automatic deduct or automatic withdrawal, right? And so when we're looking at a block in that scenario, the symptom is the client not paying. The block is perhaps a limiting belief about how we aren't worthy of having abundance, or we have to work harder than everybody else to get paid, or whatever the example is.
That's quite interesting. So it's like going to the real true cause of what's generating that stress, because ultimately it sounds like the symptom or the suffering is the stress, but trying to treat the symptom doesn't fix it. So you got to really get down to the cause, to the block. You call it a block and you could call it a cause.
Yeah, synonymous.
What's holding you back from finding a solution, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. So let's go on to step 3. What's the next step?
Yeah. So as part of step 2, we usually identify a decent list of blocks. And this is intentional. So we see ourselves in all of our glory, but also our flaws, and we start to accept really what's there. Step 3 is to create a plan. Because oftentimes many of us just kind of we're like, oh, here's the blocks, I want to do them, I want to get them all out like yesterday, get me out of this suffering, right? And that's just not the case. In fact, that creates more suffering for ourselves. So we create a plan to pull out blocks one by one, in the order in which they're creating the most suffering. And then step 4, that's when we're doing the deep work of removing these blocks one by one, the more tedious work, if you will. So for instance, the example that I gave about money mindset or money, a limiting belief around money, then we start to look at the neural pathways. Okay, well, for 25 years, for 40 years, my neural pathways have been going this way, telling this money story. So then we actively begin engaging in one of the tools that I teach, which is called fact checking, which begins to pat down, to trailblaze a new neural pathway, a new belief that is going to support us. So that would be an example. And in order to do that, we have to do it over and over and over again. The consistency is the piece. Now, not all of them, all of our blocks are going to be a limiting belief, but that's an example.
So it's putting a plan in place to, once you know your blocks, have a solution and how to apply that solution.
Yeah.
Am I correct?
So step 4 is really about implementing. Step 3 is the plan,
Okay.
and step 4 is like,
Okay.
let's get to it.
Okay.
Yeah. And then step 5 is embrace grace. And this is the part of the process where we realize at some point we realize we're not perfect, nor are we meant to be perfect. But it's at this point where we're really consistently using the tools and the process to support ourselves. So we're identifying blocks as they reveal themselves. We're using the tools. We're doing the consistent maintenance work to stay in that beautiful state of mind as much as we can, right? Because the great example that I love to give is that if we're single, if we're not in a relationship, we go through all of our blocks. We address all of our stuff that's creating suffering for ourselves. And we're feeling really content, really good. And then all of a sudden we get in a relationship and we start to have some conflicts, something starts to come up, whatever the example. And we think, oh, I thought I worked on this. The reality is that block didn't have a symptom because it wasn't being poked and prodded at. And so embrace grace is about saying, oh, there's something that's coming up here. Let's look at what the symptom is so we can figure out the block and continue doing the deep work.
So it sounds like it's a process of building self-awareness, self-consciousness of what the person is actually doing internally to keep themselves in a state of stress. And using your 5-step approach helps them to, I guess, become aware of that and take the necessary steps to unravel it.
Yeah. And I would say, typically what I love to talk about in conversations like ones that you and I are having is the importance of that very first step. Manage your energy, manage your nervous system. There are so many coaching programs, there's so many offerings, there's so many words of advice out there that are teaching that we should just we need to just fix it, like let's whatever we can do to make the suffering go away. And the first step of my program is teaching the actual science of the nervous system. So it's less about fixing the problem and more about awareness, about understanding. So the first thing that we start to understand is that each and every one of us have a nervous system to begin with. And this nervous system is broken up into 2 pieces. There's the fight, flight, freeze, or faint part of the nervous system, and then there's the rest and digest part. We get to
The what part?
know.
What's the second part? Sorry.
Oh, rest and digest.
Oh, rest and digest. Okay.
Rest and digest. Yes. Um, and so that first step, we're really looking at, okay, what is supportive of our nervous system? So first, I teach this process called the emotional sobriety process. And this first tool, the emotional sobriety process, is about actually just bringing in deep awareness. We listen to our thought patterns, we mirror the thought patterns, we validate and empathize with them. And simply in doing this, we begin to calm our nervous system. There's some science behind that. We also look at the physical sobriety piece, how the nervous system is affected by just the science of the nervous system is affected by things like caffeine or nicotine or complex carbs, AKA like if a drop in blood sugar happens, what happens then is that adrenaline is released in the body, and adrenaline creates stress, it creates irritability and all those crazy symptoms without ever having needed a stressor. So we have this foundation of the program that's not only holding you kind of your emotions, your mind, but also your physical being. And just in working that foundational step, we avoid the practice of that probably many of us have heard about, called spiritual bypassing, where we're just kind of, we go straight into fixing. We try to meditate it or pray it or journal our problems away without ever having really sat with the emotion or sat with the stress response to begin with.
Very interesting. So are there different energy, what do you call the first step again? Sorry.
Yeah. So the first step is manage your energy.
Oh,
In other words,
energy.
manage your nervous system. Yeah.
So do different people have different forms of energy that they need to manage? Or is it just like, how does one become aware of what that energy, what needs to be managed?
Yeah. So really in this first stage, we use basically an ongoing, consistent, preemptive practice. So this is really about bringing awareness. So we're not saying, oh, I've got money problems that I'm worried about, or, oh, I've got this thing I'm worried about, and I want to work on these things specifically. But we're getting a broader awareness during this first step. And so it's really about being present, being aware with where you're at, like aware of where you're at now, so that we have this foundational practice, this foundational understanding that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to be stressed. It's okay to be pissed off. It's okay to be exuberant. It's okay to be happy. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to fix anything. And in fact, if we go straight from this is uncomfortable to fixing, we're engaging in that practice called spiritual bypassing. And so the first step is really just about being present with where you're at, learning how to, the example that I've heard in the past is, babies when they're born, they don't care what they were experiencing 3 seconds ago, right? So 1 minute the baby could be furious and like wailing and crying, and the next minute there's like a rattle in front of them, so they're giggling and they're happy, and then the next minute their diaper's soiled and so they're crying because they're and antsy because they're uncomfortable. They don't care about what happened 3 seconds before. And so this first step is also about unwiring what we've learned, what we've stepped into as adults, right? Because I don't know how many of your listeners might resonate with this, but a lot of times as adults, what we do is we get frustrated or we get angry or whatever the emotion is. And we are just irked. And then something funny pops up on TV or somebody makes a joke and we're like, no, I can't laugh at that. I'm mad, right? And so we like dig our heels in to our emotions. And we create more suffering for ourselves by simply not being present, by not being emotionally sober.
It's a good example you make about babies, because they just live in the moment. They don't know about the past or the future. Same thing with, well, I know you have a dog. I have a dog too. They're just there now. And somehow as we grow up, we become immersed in the past and worry about the future, and we forget about the present, and we can't find well-being if we're not being in the present moment. if we're always, thinking about what happened, maybe what we did wrong or what we could have done, and worrying about the future or thinking about it, what if? And so I can relate to what you're saying about just experiencing, taking the time to really experiencing what you're going through to be able to then situate yourself and then move on to, I guess, solving it. Is that kind of a
Yeah.
good?
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
it's true. So it's first the awareness piece. And it's funny. I have so many clients who just work the first step and they experience such deep relief. Just in working like the emotional sobriety process that I teach. Um, they're like, oh my gosh, like something crazy happened. Like I didn't do the crazy coping mechanism that I normally do. And, when they tell me that, I explain, here's what happened. When you experience awareness of something, really deep awareness, which most of us don't have, we just go right into fixing. Once we experience deep awareness, what we have the opportunity for is a shift in perception. And once we have that shift in perception, it's super easy to step into a shift in behavior and then therefore get the shift in results that we're looking for. Right. And so simply by listening, we can be like, oh, yeah, that sucks over there. Maybe I'll do this. And it actually can be an unconscious shift in the way we move through the world. So in turn is the easiest way to remove stress. But the same thing goes with physical sobriety, right? So someone who, like myself, I was convinced that caffeine didn't affect my nervous system at all. And then I slowly weaned myself off of it and found that years ago, found that my PTSD symptoms started to get less and less and less. And I started to feel better and better and better. And all I had to do was substitute a cup of I never was a coffee drinker, but a cup of black tea for, anything else. And I was feeling so much more emotional freedom than I had ever felt.
So we talked about the 5 steps of this process, and where do you come in? Like, how important is it to have a coach to help you apply these 5 steps? Just want to hear a little bit on that.
Yeah. So I have, during each step, I have tools and trainings that I provide for my clients. And then I really guide them through each piece. So, first and foremost, from a big picture, my life experience really plays into a deeper understanding of someone who has gone through loss, who understands that, um, some of the crazy messages that the world tells us, like, oh, replace the loss or time will heal all wounds, right? So I have an understanding that that stuff is just off the table. It's not relevant. It doesn't matter. The stories that society tells us. So my life experience is often comforting to those that I work with. So there's that component. And then, like, for instance, the first step we were just talking about, the 4-step emotional sobriety process. This is a proprietary process that I teach, that clients really learn and grasp and hold on to really learn how to be present. Because there's so many yogis and meditation instructors and all sorts of practitioners all over the globe that are like, just be present. But there's no tangibles. And so the value in working with someone like me is that I don't take a simple, I put that in air quotes, word like be present for granted. I actually break down, how do you do that? What does that look like? How do you engage in being present to your emotions so that you're not stepping into spiritual bypassing? And, and going through into step 2, the value in having someone like me work with you is that, well, again, I have a proprietary process that I teach that helps getting to the root so much easier. But also, I think this is the value across the board with any coach that you or mentor that you might work with, is that you don't know what you don't know. You can't see what you can't see. And so working with someone like me who has perhaps been in a similar situation or experienced devastating loss, I have the outside perspective that you might not be able to gain on your own. And so that's really valuable in speeding up the process of getting from point A to point B and reducing the amount of suffering that we're experiencing, whether it's low grade misery or whether it's like, oh my gosh, get me out of here yesterday. Just speeding up that process as well.
So it doesn't have to be a devastating loss for people to actually gain from this process and relieve the stressors that are causing some anxiety or misery in their life.
Yeah, 100%. And most of the people that I work with, I mean, their devastating loss didn't happen yesterday.
Right.
I've worked with people who lost their father, 3 years ago, 10 years ago. I've worked with people who, someone who, was mourning the loss of a secret marital affair. It was a year ago. 10 years ago. It really doesn't have to be recent for it to impact the
It's
nervous
still
system.
stuck there somewhere and causing this stress. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can relate.
Creates a new way of being that we just perpetuate without even realizing it. Because
Yeah.
when we're going through the loss,